today. So tonight we have our very own Art Gallagher, who's our treasurer, and Roxanne Scholl, who will be talking about resilience, operational resilience. Before we start though, just to name other notices. So this is the lunch event that we'll have this summer. Well, we were hoping to hold one next month, but unfortunately that's fallen through. So we will not hold any in July or August, but we'll hold another event in September. And then, of course, in October, we have our conference. So this year's conference theme is around AI. You know, if there's a bandwagon, why don't we all jump on it? But looking at AI within the context of service management. So what are the opportunities around using AI within service management? I think actually there's probably quite a lot to talk about. So if anyone is interested in presenting or knows anyone then maybe doing something around AI in service management or in IT asset management, then please do let us know, because we'd love to have you presenting. So I think that's it for the moment. So please do get in touch. Today's event is a joint event actually with the ISSG. What does ISSG stand for?
Information Security
Specialist Group.
Specialist does, yeah. I'm a member of that group.
Oh, right. So, so thanks very much to the ISSG for co-sponsoring this event. They are actually having their 40th anniversary this year, which is quite special, really. And so they've asked us to just call out about a couple of their anniversary events coming up, of which they have a few. They're far more organised than we are. So they have a joint hybrid panel event with the IRMA group on the 13th of June. They have a joint cloud event with Cisco, which is coming up, but they're not sure of the date yet. So if you're interested in that, do keep an eye open on their webpage. They've got a joint panel event with the BCS Women on encouraging women into information and cybersecurity. And again, the date is TBC. And then finally, the other event that they've got planned is the post-quantum cryptography webinar with Professor Bill Buchanan. And again, that date's coming up, so that one sounds quite exciting. So yeah, so they've sound really busy over the summer. Puts us to shame, really. And yeah, what an achievement, 40th anniversary. That's really exciting, actually. So yes, quite a packed program coming up. I wish it was ours. And with that, I will hand over to Art and Roxanne. Thanks very much.
You want to speak to you, don't you? Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you for coming along to the offices in London and for joining us online as well. I just wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded. So you're welcome to put any questions that you've got into the chat, or as it's known, raise your hands if you're in the room. But don't forget that your voice and the answer will, of course, go onto the recording. We put that up on our YouTube channel normally a couple of weeks after the event for anybody who couldn't actually make it on the evening. So we're going to be talking about operational resilience. This is a topic that is something that I'm really excited has come along, and I'd like to share some of that excitement with you. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you too will also be quite enthusiastic about it. Okay.
Right audience.
Yes. So first of all, before I dive into the details about operational resilience, I just wanted to compare and contrast it with the most common way that people look at cyber. So cyber risk versus operational resilience. And so it's a balance. It's a positives and negatives. I think the other thing is that very often within IT, we're focused on technology. And it's all about the IT, it's all about the systems and the services that we produce. But actually, what I'm going to be talking about today, whenever I say business services, I don't mean what we normally think of as business services in the ITAR world. I mean actual services that the business delivers to their customers. And so it's about expanding the view a little bit to think about more than just the technology. And so these are two things that kind of complement each other, but also there's a different way of looking at things. You've got cyber risk. It's about what can go wrong. It's about mitigating that risk. It's about trying to prevent things from happening. Whereas actually, operational resilience gives us a chance to look at things with a positive forward view on things. What is it you do want? What does the business need in order to make sure it survives into the future? And so it's more about actively doing things rather than stopping things from happening that we don't want to happen that are coming from outside. So it's quite empowering from that point of view. And so the quote at the bottom is just, it's a little bee I've got in my bonnet, that in order to be successful, it's simpler to strive for something that you do wish for rather than trying to avoid a thing that you don't.
So we're not going to delve into these principles immediately, but they are things that are going to keep recurring throughout the presentation. And hopefully they're things that you're all familiar with. They're things that we talk about every day, be that cyber or be that service management. But a key purpose of this presentation is to demonstrate how much you already understand about resilience and put a positive spin on that, as Arthur said, in terms of us going back to our businesses and having a positive conversation about the opportunity rather than maybe a more negative one about why it went wrong. But we're hoping that you should be able to take something away from this evening that takes that back to say, actually, we are ready, we are prepared, and we already know a lot about these sorts of things.
So operational resilience is hitting first in the area of financial services. As is so common, regulation comes to the key system that makes the world go round, apparently, and I'll come on to how that's happening in a minute, but what we're going to do is look at how it's going to ripple out from there. There's already starting to be some impact on critical infrastructure in this country, and we'll look at how it's being planned to hit the public sector as well, and importantly about legislation that's going to make it not only a problem, not only something you need to consider within your own organization, but also your supply chain. So going back to the 70s, I grew up with Basil Fawlty, and he was pretty much the epitome of an operational disaster. If anything could go wrong, it would go wrong. But that's not actually the Basil I'm talking about. I'm talking about BASEL, the place in Switzerland. That's the Committee for the Banking Stability. So the Basel Committee for the Stability in Banking was set up back in 1974. And the reason I'm putting in this slide is just to show how it started off with the G10 countries, the most developed countries in the world, according to us, of course. But then over time, it spread. In 2009, people were reeling from the shock of 2007, 2008, the credit crunch. And so there were many other countries that started to join up and sign up to be part of the Basel Committee. And then more recently in 2014, there are a lot more countries that maybe at one time we'd have called them third world or developing, but actually they're very powerful upcoming countries from across the world. So this is a way in which what we're looking at now is spreading. And so, sorry, another Basel from the 70s, but the committee published in March 2021 their principles for operational resilience. Now, they're not maybe the first of the game, but these are what they came up with. And you'll see that they're quite similar to the topics that we were looking at earlier. And you'll see the same kind of things coming through, because there are different flavors from different regulations and different jurisdictions, but at the end of the day, the principles of making sure your business continues to run no matter what is something, well, it's something we've all had to deal with in the past couple of years, and maybe it's a little bit late now to deal with those, but this is going to put us in a better position to be able to deal with whatever the future throws at us.
And it already started 2018 with GDPR. And I think that was the first regulation that came in and really scared our businesses into doing something, but also gave service management and cyber the opportunity to start to say, actually, where is our data? Where are our services? What is going on? And really put a focus on spending money and time on doing the things that we like to do as service management people: asset configuration, service map, service portfolio, all that sort of thing had to feed in to the start of what then GDPR became. And as we move forward now, what started with GDPR about knowing where your personal data was is now evolving into TS213.
Yeah. So this is not actually a piece of law, but it's just a part of a new set of rules that's come from there's the Financial Conduct Authority, there's the Prudential Regulation Authority, and the Bank of England. They've come together to look at how operational resilience could be implemented to serve best the financial stability in this country. And so the first part that came in at the beginning of last year was that any firms in financial services that they cover within their remit, they would have to identify their important business services. And so just to give you an idea about what we're talking about here, business services. So from a banking point of view, it's as simple as making sure a customer can pay money from their account to another account. Or it could be the production of statements. Now, behind that, there's all sorts of, sometimes they're IT systems, sometimes they're not. So another one is, in a branch, you might have authenticating a customer. So there's a customer standing in front of you. How do you know that they're really who they say they are? You might rely on a computerized system or a card or a PIN, but you might be able to challenge them with some information. There's a whole series of different ways that that could be done. How can you make sure that that can happen no matter what? Okay, so all they needed to do in 2022 was to identify which those services were.
Which is not exactly easy, it turned out. I was in financial services and it's been, oh, have we got one of those? There's been quite a lot of that going on. Easier said than done.
Yes. But then, of course, by 2025, they'd have to map out everything behind that, all of the other stages that we were talking about understanding the processes and the systems and the liabilities behind that. But another thing that's changed since then is that there's the FSM bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, sorry. So this is going to make a change to the Financial Services and Markets Act of 2000 and say that it's not only financial firms that have to follow these regulations now, but it's also anybody who's deemed to be a critical third party. So it's not just your banks, but your bank suppliers.
It takes your access database system to a whole new level, doesn't it? Finding out where your business has put things in with these little tiny third parties.
Absolutely, yes. And so people are going to have to look through their contracts and get an idea about, how much they are allowed to find out information. Because if you've got to map what's behind those business services, you've got to understand how the company, your supplier, is delivering those to you. And you've got to understand the risks on them as well as on you.
I think we were talking about when we put this presentation together, I had a story from we were building OpenShift platforms for payment systems. And about 2 years ago, all of the scalability of all of the OpenShift systems in Amazon went down for about 12 hours because all of them were reliant on one open source piece of code that fell over. So nobody could scale for 12 hours until somebody in the OpenShift community went in and then took that service back up again so that everybody could scale. Now they took it back in then as a proper enterprise service from Amazon, but it wasn't until it fell over did everybody realize there was a little tiny piece that was critical to the basic functionality of an OpenShift cluster to be able to scale was fundamentally open source.
Yes.
And nobody responsible.
So how would you define a critical third party?
So there are there's a set of factors that have been published in the PS 21.3 guidelines that suggest how you identify criticality, but it's basically would an issue that they encounter prevent you from being able to service your customers? So it's about the impact it would have on your organization and your ability to do what you need. But essentially, you know, if you're relying on somebody to supply you an information service or a person on the end of the phone in the call center or anything like that, if that is a critical part of your way that you do business, then you need to get an understanding of the factors that are could be affecting that supplier.
Yeah.
And to make it slightly more complicated, because this is not a piece of legislation, it's the Treasury that's going to come up with the rules for who the third-party suppliers are. They've already given some indication as to who that could be, but it could be at some point next year that a firm who sells a piece of software to financial firms will suddenly be told, you are now a part of this regulation, so you need to comply with all the rules. So it may be coming to people who weren't really expecting it.
Yes, it'd be interesting. We were just talking about plugging in all these SaaS solutions and how easy it is now. But you think about something like Slack that you might not consider being a critical piece of infrastructure. But if you're running all your comms, all your alerting, all of your CI/CD pipelines through that, it could quite possibly be something that gets picked up.
Absolutely. Let's talk to government departments about what's up.
We're having that conversation today, actually.
And so most of this focus has been on the UK, but also let's not forget there's also the DORA Act, which has just been, it's just gone into force from the beginning of this year, but it will actually need to be complied with fully in 2 years' time. So by 2025, then not only will firms with customers in the UK have to deal with this issue, but also any firms that have critical third-party providers, any firms that have customers in the EU, you'll also have to follow the EU regulations. So
Everybody then, because who doesn't have global customers now? Good news for us though.
Huh?
Plenty of work for us though.
Sorry, can I just, I think it's similar to CE marking. We have a UKCA now. I think there might be a UK DORA as well. I've been hearing.
All right.
well, I'm not, so from what I understand, the DORA itself won't be required in the UK as a piece of legislation, because there's already legislation covering what financial firms have to do, and the FCA and the PRA and the Bank of England make up the rules they have to follow. But with this new Financial Services Markets Bill, it's in the House of Lords at the moment. It's been through report stage, so it's going to be happening, I think, during this session of Parliament, that should be turned into law. And then at that point, it's up, the Treasury will be able to say who these critical, what the categories are. And so it'll be with the regulators. It won't need to be law. So, but it will be the equivalent of DORA in the UK.
There's a question in the chat.
Not sure. Was there a question in the chat, Ian?
This one.
Yeah, it's up there.
Oh, yeah, there's a comment in the chat, and it is FCA have a consultation out on potential DORA equivalents.
Ah, okay. Right.
Have to make their money somehow, I suppose, and justify those swanky old in Canary Wharf.
Yes. But I do know that there's also a consultation that are running, closes tomorrow. But they're trying to find out, they're asking people who think they could be critical third parties, how much do you think it will cost to factor this into your services, because they're expecting that your prices are going to go up when people have to do more. So they are trying to bear in mind the consequences of it.
The cost of compliance.
Yes, the cost of compliance. So don't expect banking to suddenly get cheaper anytime soon.
Well, anything to get cheaper, to be fair, if it's going to keep spreading out like that.
Absolutely. Okay. So that was banking. Critical infrastructure is, now I didn't realise this until today, but sectors that are listed on the screen, they're all looked over by a department of MI5 called the National Protective Security Authority, and they're actually in charge of putting the rules out that determine what is critical within those sectors. So some of them, obviously, civil nuclear, energy, you can see, health, certain aspects of it. I'm not sure how much space we have in this country, but water, very clearly. All of these organisations are critical to the running of our country, and so the rules that are going to be applied to organisations working in those sectors are going to increase. The government said that it wants to set specific and ambitious cyber resilience targets for all these sectors to meet by 2025, and they want to see all private companies who work in these sectors complying with these rules by 2025.
Better start those projects now then.
Well, so I know that some of these sectors, they have already, you know, they've been around for a long time. They've had to look after their infrastructure, but to have to go through these rules and consider, you know, the third parties and the suppliers, and to map all of this out, it is certainly going to be quite a bit of
I don't think I've ever met anybody though who has worked in those ones. I've been in finance and transport, and you would think that the regulation would force you to do things to a certain level. It's always amazing how loose maybe things are to what you'd expect as a consumer. Certainly when I went into finance, I was, compared to transport, I was surprised how much more easy, or payments at least, was easygoing in comparison.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 years. I'd start now.
Yes. Oh, another thing is that so there was the Network and Information Services Regulations of 2018 that were set out, and I believe they're talking about changing who is considered to be a digital service provider. So it's no longer people like networks and telcos. Managed service providers will be included within the scope of the NIS regulations. So again, it's not actually creating new laws, it's just saying who the existing laws apply to.
So that's Capita, PCS, G4S,
Yes.
the Dex though.
So
They all keep buying each other, you lose track, don't you?
Yes.
But it'll be those guys.
so again, by looking through your supply chain, there's a lot more people going to have to be complying with this. Okay, so these same topics keep coming up, and we've been talking a lot about big organizations, infrastructure, the national grid, these kind of things, but actually these same topics are recommended in the cybersecurity toolkit for boards. Now, this is actually a really useful resource that is valuable for SMEs as well. And they're explaining the same kind of principles can be used in identifying, you know, what's critical to your business running, making sure that you assign responsibilities for governance, all of those kind of things. It's relevant to all sizes of companies. Now, there's no regulations that say that SMEs need to follow these, but perhaps it might not be a bad idea to protect yourself.
Yeah, and that's where the benefit of operational resilience is coming in. Is some of it's regulatory, some of it's cyber, cost avoidance, saving on your cyber insurance, and some of it's just best practice. You know, that was the amazing thing when we started talking about this topic, was actually the expansion of those same core practices comes up again and again. Who are your customers? What are your business services? What are the priorities? How are they connected together? What happens when they fall over? Well, let's hope they never do. But having a plan for dealing with it, testing regularly, and then having the governance and controls in place. And one of the most difficult things always to do, who's responsible? Who's the responsible owner for this thing? It depends on whether it's broken or not, doesn't it?
Yes, yes. And I was having a conversation earlier with Olu here about the fact that most commonly in boards at the moment, you say, oh, it's a cyber problem. Well, we had an attack and we've dealt with it. Because it's never going to come back again. Oh, yes, the CIO deals with that because it's technology. Well, actually, you know, there's starting to be hopefully a realization that it's not just about the IT stuff, it's the whole business. So the whole business needs to be interested.
And that's, I think, where enterprise service management started to come in as well. When I was at SITS last week, and there was a lot more talk about how do the tools then expand out into services around HR and finance, but then the regulation starts to go out as well. Just because your IT system failed doesn't mean that that was the reason. It might have been a business process failure that wasn't technology based, like you said about the validation of the customer at the point of the bank. Does that person look like that? No technology involved there.
No,
just a human being.
Yeah. Just you know, on the topic of so it's business services, it's the whole business, it's the business customers, and so the service maps, you know, they need to go out and they need to identify third party. So you can't stop your map at the organizational borders. You can't have a bit at the edge where here be dragons, because you don't understand what's beyond there. Because, you know, if you stop that far, then you run the risk of falling foul of these rules. You need to look down your supply chain. You need to find out what the risks are, what they depend on. If they depend on another third party, then you really need to know that. So, you know, you can give an outsourced process to somebody else to deal with, but at the end of the day, you carry the can. There's no excuses.
Can I just say that one of our clients is a health service, a small part of it, the NHS, and that's exactly what we find. When the services are outsourced, it goes to third parties. They themselves outsource to somebody else, and fourth party, and they could be in America, you know, Pakistan, or, you know, Canada. So when we do a supplier audits, it becomes quite a challenge.
Yes. Yes, and I think one of the things that people are being advised to do is to look at their contracts. And so when you renew a contract with a supplier, at that point you want to be making sure, do you have the transparency? Do you get to ask them who are your subcontractors? Do you get to find out, you know, how do you ensure resilience within your organization? So, you know, there are important times when you've got the control and you can actually do something about it.
There's certain aspects of the contract requirements under DORA where that's going to be mandatory. And if the suppliers don't sign up to it, they won't be able to operate with EU entities as a supplier.
Yes.
It'd be like a disqualification process.
Yeah.
There's some questions or comments in the chat, actually.
Ian, is there a
voice in the sky?
Yeah.
any questions that you wanted to bring up from the chat? Look at it, yeah. Find out.
Hello, thanks, Archie. I think I was just like to say, I've put a link to the resilience guidance from the UK government, and also people might want to bear in mind that the National Cyber Security Centre have quite good guidance on supply chain management, because quite a specialist area, I think, and lots of organisations sometimes don't have the in-house specialist knowledge to manage suppliers. So it's the National Cyber Security Centre are a good starting point to look at for additional guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some really good resources out there. Once you start looking, you'll find there's a mine of stuff. But yeah, I guess this is why I was excited to bring this out to people, to make people aware of what's coming so that you can look into it and find out how you can get involved, and that probably brings us, no, I'll come back to that topic in a moment. What we'll just look at first at the downside when things don't quite work out, and a few of these might be familiar.
I think they're familiar. I think they're easy to forget though, and it's quite difficult to go back and look for companies that had a problem and failed and then just vanished. And BlackBerry's the obvious one, and everybody in this room was probably old enough to remember. But there's a whole generation of people coming into work now that weren't around. They just completely missed it. What is a BlackBerry? There's a novel thing. But 2.7 billion. The one I like the most at the minute, and I think will make the biggest difference in terms of when we're having those difficult conversations to say this needs to be done, it needs specialist skills as investment, was the TSB CIO, who wasn't the CIO anymore, still got an £80,000 personal fine. So that personal accountability coming into the regulated industries, similar to construction, the directors of construction companies are personally criminally liable for the health and safety. That seems to be coming into finance now. Post office, 43 million in costs, $1 billion for ruining people's lives from not managing stuff properly, not being clear about accountability, what was going on, who was doing the testing. People were sent to prison. British Airways is 170 million on here, and then they got fined on the next slide another 20 million, so that's 200 million. So how much has British Airways lost in compensation, regulatory fines, costs of investment, costs of downtime, that's making that business not profitable, completely. And then RBS is always my favorite one, because that was the one that they decided they were going to outsource it out to, they fired everybody, outsourced it all out to TCS or somebody similar in India. 2015, I think. And it was the lack of operational resilience to know that you didn't press that key, you press that key on the base 24 script. And obviously everyone was out for part of a week, I believe. So I think they saved 17 million in operational costs, and it cost them 56 million in fines and recovery. And they're so easy to forget. And I think we were discussing it before we started. It's always somebody else's problem. It will never happen to me until it does. And I think unless we get better at making that sale as a cyber and a service management group, or people are just getting burned more often, that we're going to keep having this problem. But hopefully the regulations will also come in and kind of up the priority a little bit, because it's, again, the cost of compliance. And how do you say, well, we've avoided $150 million loss? It's quite a difficult sell, really, but they're ongoing. And then poor old Capita, I still don't think they're quite back up again. It's been about 6 weeks.
Well, I
They've
think
been infiltrated.
Yeah, Capita's a story that's going to be giving us plenty to think about. It's going to be going on for quite a while.
Yeah, it'll be quite an interesting
when
one.
you look at, how long ago some of those were, how long ago TSB was, and
Just think it was 2021. BlackBerry was 2013. Broadbank's on 2015. Which 2020.
Yeah, but the fines can come quite a long time afterwards.
Yes. Well, like we were saying, Experian, LastPass, they've all had more recent breaches.
Yes.
Yeah, I suppose the question really is, can we prevent it completely? The answer probably is no. All we can do is to put enough in place to mitigate the impact of it, to reduce that impact.
And that's always the difficulty, isn't it? Is you prevent it completely, and you have lovely stable systems, and they say, why is our stable system costing me so much? It's like, because it's lovely and stable and organized, and we've kept on top of it. Why do I need all these service delivery managers and asset managers and config and all these expensive tools like ServiceNow Discovery or whatever? It's like, because that's preventing you from having these problems, and it's a difficult sell on that fast and slow thinking.
I think it's important to note, to your point there, I think that the fines and the regulators come down heavy if they see a lack of trying to do the right thing. So had these guys, British Airways, for example, they could have prevented that with about 12 lines of code. But when they looked at it, and I've read the ICO report on that, they found lots of things that they could have done, that they should have done, that they didn't. So that's why the culpability is that much higher.
Interesting.
I suppose we should really take a holistic approach and use tools. NCSE, we use that a lot. NCSE tools are out there. It's a matter of finding the tools and using them. And also it's education across the board, isn't it? Especially from the top.
Yes.
You've got to educate the top management. And there's even an international standard for governance of organizations, ISO 37000. We work with that.
Yeah.
The tools are there. It's up to us as humans to get a hold of those tools and use them across the board. It has to come from the top.
But unfortunately, it can be sometimes that you get ISO compliance for things like governance, and that's just a tick box. And so you need not only you need the framework to be there, but actively used as a part of the way you do business.
What did I say to you? I think we could all pass an ISO audit with the right risk register and the right answers to the auditor, can't we? And that's the difficulty, is 27,000 is the one that everybody rolls out. Oh, I've got ISO accreditation. It's like, ugh. And it's the need of the customers, be that government or whoever, of upping their standards and saying, no, I want to see what's the cybersecurity one, the cybersecurity business continuity, upping it and saying, actually, there you go. That must be the numbers. 27,000 sticks in my head, but it's sometimes I'm embarrassed how easy it is to achieve. Really, and it comes from the wrong place. You're asked to pass it. I can pass it with a risk register and a really good fan dance for the auditor, but that wasn't the purpose, and it undermines everything that we try and do.
Still have that if your customers are asking for it, great. You want to do business, fine. But internally, I keep coming back to top management. Internally, there has to be a culture within the organization, coming from the top, being directed by the top, from the top, to say, look, guys and girls, we've got the certificate, great, the gong, wonderful, but internal auditors, the top management should say during management review meetings, I want to see the effectiveness of these. We don't just want
right?
certification. We want to see effectiveness.
If your management's being incentivized on the delivery of the thing, not on the serviceability of it, and you come back into service management versus product management and bringing those two things together until you switch the incentives to say stability is your target, security is your target, not did I deliver my $100 million program on time, take my gong and move on to my next job. That 3-year churning cycle, I don't think.
Business continuity management system, ISO 23301. It's been there for years.
Yeah.
But now, hopefully, if these fines aren't enough motivation, it's delivering your business, keep on receiving your revenue from your customers, being in a position to be able to grow your business. Hopefully, companies that are forward thinking, they'll be looking at the ways of how can we make sure that we don't let our customers down. How can we make sure that we keep our reputation? Because that's where the money comes in. And so, it's not the carrot as well as the stick. And hopefully this is something that boards will get on board with, and they'll see past the technology, they'll see past the complicated stuff with all the acronyms they don't recognize, and go, I want my customers to be able to do that, to take our service and use it any day, any time, without it going wrong. And that should be what's important to them.
Hello, Art.
Yes.
Yeah, I've just got a comment to add. I think quite a few organisations have fallen the 3 line of defence, whereby they're relying on their internal product development teams to manage the vulnerabilities, and then some organisations then have like an internal assurance function, which helps to provide resilience and help provide defence from attack. And then obviously you've got like the external regulators that provide that 3rd level as well. So I think it's like a combined approach to manage vulnerability that is the way forward. Yes, thank you.
And also you see that in cyber resilience, you do see where there are teams that are actively trying to prove that systems are stable and reliable, and to prod them until things go wrong. And so, let's not just do that on the TCP ports that are exposed to the world. Let's do it on that piece of equipment in the corner that nobody knows that might get knocked over one day and it makes everything fall down. So yeah. Okay, so you're making the point earlier on about how if you can prove that you were trying to do things right, then actually it's not quite so bad. And so this is actually coming back to GDPR, because GDPR is the reason why the Information Commissioner's Office can give out fines. And so these are the areas of compliance that they suggest. So some of them are a little bit more technical, a little bit more cyber than we've been talking about. But you know, understanding what your assets are and making sure that they're reliable and testing things. And very importantly, somebody said something about education, which is a really important part of all of this, helping people understand what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, when something's right and when something's wrong. So if you can demonstrate these, then that's fine. Unfortunately, British Airways, as we said earlier, they
poster boy for how not to do it.
Yes, unfortunately.
Hopefully they've learned now.
Mind you, they must have either they had really good lawyers or they must have done some of this, because the original fine they were ticketed for £183 million by the ICO, but by negotiating they managed to reduce that.
I don't get 183 million, but the CEO and the Cs weren't personally criminally liable. If that had been a construction company, or like, didn't they go after Airbus after the Air France plane and the Concorde and all that? They did go after them, didn't they? But you don't, there's not the same culpability. Back to your point about accountability and top management and whatever, there's a gap still there. They just move on to the next project. How many times have we seen that?
Yes.
What happened to the senior managers regime in financial services? Does it extend to?
Not individual culpability. That TSB fine was the first time that it was the Prudential Regulatory Authority.
Yes, and
that he should have had better control of his program, but really 80 grand for a TSB CIO was probably not the biggest fine you could have given him to actually notice. You know, our old CIO was buying Banksies for fun, you know, that's how much money he was making. So yeah, it was like, wow, okay. He was going Banksy shopping.
But in that particular case, it was because he basically said to the supplier, yeah, no problems.
Yeah, whatever.
I'll trust you, whatever. Whereas he should have been looking at it and going, hang on a second, are you really actually doing what you so again, you know, when you outsource the responsibility, you don't outsource the accountability. And so I think that was it was a good wake-up call, at least.
Yeah, very recent as well, within the last 6 to 8 months.
It's still a challenge, supplier audits. I think you were mentioning it, supplier audits. We do supplier audits, but some of them don't want to talk to us. And we say, look, it's not us who are saying this. We actually point to the GDPR.
With the financial regulations, all of that does mean that if they want to carry on doing business in finance, then they'll need to get with the principals, or you know, they don't have to sell their services to banks if they don't want to. But if they do want to, this is how they're going to have to.
So we just have to, as auditors, internal or external, we just need to be firmer with those that don't want to talk to us. You know, in the old days, they used to call it light. Well, they had light touch regulation, but now we've got to change that.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's difficult internally, right? Because then you get a reputation. Service management gets its reputation for being the stick in the mud and always complaining that it's not right or whatever. It's like, well, no, the people that do these things are cut from that cloth where it's never quite good enough and we chase it down, but it can be seen as, well, computer says no, can't it? And then this is hopefully shifting that balance a little bit to elevate it rather than.
Yes, so hopefully this is the point where we can actually turn out to be the heroes of the situation, because all of the skills that are required for putting operational resilience into practice are things that many people in service management do on a day-to-day basis. And have done for many years. It may be that their focus has been a little bit more parochial and focusing on technology systems rather than the whole end-to-end customer journey within the business. But you know, the principles are the same. The questions that you workshop with people are going to be the same. How you elicit that information from whoever and get it onto a process map, it's going to be the same.
And it's about, for us, it was about demonstrating, it's about elevating that skill and capability and knowledge about the business out of service management and IT, and saying, actually, these people care about your business. They're incredibly detail orientated. They will sit there and read the manuals and the regulations for fun, you know, and the contracts, because some of us enjoy doing those sorts of things, not just as bedtime reading, but then elevating those skills back into the business to give them more value to the business, more value to us individually as professionals, but also elevating the whole practice, where cyber have done a very good marketing job on our key skills and processes. Cyber have done a much better job at marketing that and selling it as something that businesses should invest in.
Well, it's always easier to sell something scary. You know, the bad news is the one that sells the newspapers. It's the one that gets people's attention on this swiping on their phone. But hopefully this can be a way of, you know, starting to look at the positive.
Culture change.
Yes.
I think it starts with us as well. It's about service management having a much more positive view of itself rather than just assuming that we're going to be told that we can't do it, because it's how do you take a lesson from the sexy people over at cyber who have stolen our gig, paid more money and got all the tools and whatever, but they've done a very good job. And you see it in the headlines with AI at the minute. You know, the Google guy leaving because it was so bad. It's like, well, they've probably got a tool to sell somebody to prevent something bad from happening. And how do we elevate, bring that forward and use these regulations as a way of promoting that rather than demoting it and seeing it as a bad.
Ourselves.
We all talk about GDPR and go, how do you look at DORA and go, no, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a big problem with organizations generally is they're terribly siloed. And also, you know, even professions that should be talking to each other completely fail to. I remember I was, you know, on LinkedIn once and something in my feed, I liked something by a cybersecurity professional, and then the feed sort of, there was another one, and basically somebody, you know, it was a group of security professionals saying, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we knew exactly where our assets were? And I was just shaking. You bothered to go and speak to your asset manager.
There's clues in the title.
So, you know, we need to talk to each other a lot more as well.
Yes.
That's what a management system does. Sorry, I'm promoting. Maybe I should keep doing management systems. That's exactly what it does. It breaks down the silos, brings all the processes, all the business functions together as one system.
I do wonder as well if it's starting to be a generational problem, because you've had people who have come in, done cyber degrees, come into cyber, all they know is cyber, and you don't know anything about service management. I did engineering at university, and then I fell into doing service management by accident because somebody needed me to backfill a job and I didn't want to do the job I was doing. And I ended up doing it and found my thing, but it wasn't something I was taught. I was taught all the engineering, all the infrastructure, and the cyber people are being taught all the cyber, and actually the bit that holds it together. And we're quite a humble lot generally. You don't want to go around not flashy like sitting in the front of the cybers. You can tell they've shown up. So it's showing the rest of the that's what it is. Illustrated my point beautifully. There you go.
Yeah, but yeah, like you say, a service management on your average 3 course gets between a day, an hour, and a slide, depending on which course you're on.
I don't even think I had that. Yeah, it was accidental, and I'm still doing it now 15 years later. So yeah, plenty of opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. And I did just add this down here, Business Continuity Awareness Week, which is this week. And I think So I think this is a really positive thing for people in service management, but for people who work in business continuity, they must just be leaping up and down with joy. The fact that the board are actually going to start listening to, what it is they've been talking about for many, many, many years, and just be, yeah, shh, play with your reports. So yes, hopefully more people will. It's not about continuing the business. It's about making sure that the business doesn't disappear. It's not about what will happen when there's one day outage. It's what will happen when something really bad happens.
Yeah. And it's so easy to forget. Say you've got a whole generation of people come in and would just won't even know what BlackBerry was or where it was or whatever. And it's really difficult to cast your mind back and go, no, that business doesn't exist anymore, or it was swallowed by another one. Be interesting to know what happened with those banks in the States over the last couple of weeks. How much of that was cash flow and how much of that was poor operational resilience that meant that they've had to be pulled out very quickly.
So, do we have any questions from anybody? Were there any other questions on the chat? Ian?
Hello, Art. At the moment, there's no other comments on the chat. Thanks.
Okay. Has everybody had their fill in the room? You're good at asking questions as we went along and adding some really useful points as well. Thank you for contributing.
I'll ask a question. So do you think, I mean, as has been alluded to during your presentation there, sometimes it's the group that shouts loudest, or the group or the industry shouts loudest that seems to get the attention when you've got things like service management, which are no less important. In fact, you could arguably more important in some areas. So is there something that service management needs to do to up its profile? Or is it just the leaders and the boards that need to get their act together?
I think that service management could improve their profile, but if there's not the desire for the boards to engage with them, a service level manager wouldn't be able to go and knock on the CEO's door and say, would you mind if I talk to you about how your customer journey is resilient? And they're not going to necessarily be allowed in. They need to be invited in. But yeah, I do think there's an opportunity to say, look, these things that are being regulated now, this is our bread and butter. This is what we've done in this little corner of your organization. And we now can tell you where every box is and how well patched it is and all these kind of things. And how long is an acceptable amount of time for that service to be down? This is what we do. Can we do it in a bigger area? So it's definitely being ready to sell themselves, but you need the appetite, I think, to come from the top level.
I think there's also, easier said than done, right? It's making time to have those conversations about the good things you're doing, not when something's on fire. Because if that's the only time you ever see service management is when something's broken or a change has failed or whatever, you automatically end up with that negative spin on it. I would pitch always, because I'm a transition manager but at heart, the value of having the investment in service transition and service design within projects, because that's getting the attention as part of your project where the money is, and normally the attention, but also then demonstrating the value over a period of time to say, not only did we get that in on time, it's actually resilient and it's operating within the desired parameters when it's got into production. It's not just kind of landed and everyone's walked away and unhappy with it, but they're difficult sells. There's always something else to be distracted with. And that's where cyber have done a very good job at kind of going, oh, well, the bogeyman's outside, then he's going to come and get you. Whereas service management only ever show up when there's something going wrong, and having that conversation when something's going right is really hard. There's always something else going on elsewhere. But I think the enterprise service management, which seemed to be the trend at SITS last week, around how do you take the ITIL practices and apply them to your finance processes or your HR processes, and around incident request change, that may then elevate service management out of that little corner that is IT, that's seen as an overhead, and elevate it into something more of a business value. Because I mean, how many times have you tried to raise a purchase order anywhere with anything, but we know how to raise IT requests, and we've got very good at automating it. We've got very good at making it easy, and then bringing that through. But it's again, finding those people to collaborate with, because how many times you just get, nope, don't want to talk to you because you're just going to make me raise a change, or whatever other negative stereotypes that come with it.
But I think also you need to follow the money. I mean, It's funny that you talk about cybersecurity having been so effective at having those conversations, but I think if you talk to cybersecurity specialists, they've been banging on doors for probably 35 years, and it's really only since GDPR.
Yes, that seems to really got everybody's captured the imagination.
But why? Because 4% of your annual turnover is a
big enough threat.
Killing. Yeah. And the reputational damage of having to pay out that much money is business, you know, is business killing as well. So that I think that's what's got the conversation starting for cyber. So for service management, start following the money.
Yeah.
I'd say that cyber is not there yet either.
Yeah.
I was just saying to Martha beforehand, there's a lack of awareness, we believe, in the board as far as cybersecurity is concerned. There's a board that I sat on as a non-exec director, and during a one-to-one, I said to them, I said to the chair, yeah, it's been recorded.
Yes.
Well, I said to I asked about cybersecurity, information security, in fact, and they said, yes, Paul, we set people on a GDPR course. There's a difference between privacy, information security, and cybersecurity, which isn't understood by most.
Goodness.
I think where the boundaries of technology and the access to things and the ease of stuff has got so great from a consumer perspective. From a cyber perspective, it's a nightmare, but it also makes it much more difficult to articulate. It's like, hang on, when you say sign in with Google on that thing, now that thing has now got access to this, and how those things start to spread, and where the consumerness of enterprise technology is better than the boundaries around physically seeing the space or gap or where there's an edge. It's like, well, it was just dead easy. It was so easy. How can it be a threat? It's a fluffy white rabbit. What can it possibly do? You know.
So I guess going on from there, if you want as a service management professional to be listened to more by people outside in the business, then perhaps you need to be aware of who it is you've got in front of you and use different words. Don't go back to your vocabulary from the way you talk to people.
Don't get the manual out. That's a day killer.
Explain terms they can really understand.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming along. As you can see, if you want to reach out to us, there's the email address up here. If you're not a member of BCS yet, then there's a discount code for you, 20% off if you'd like to join. There's loads of events running here. There's the magazine which comes out regularly with interesting articles. In fact, there was one from one of the guys on the ISSG committee. He was talking about positive engineering for security, which is actually similar kind of topic that we're talking about here, rather than just looking at the negative. So plenty of opportunities for you to enjoy. And of course, there's social time with colleagues in the field and networking. So plenty of advantages. Okay, thank you very much.